At home, you want to just put it in the sink. Here we can put it in or out. It doesn't much matter. We have concrete countertops, so they're not going to be damaged by the pot. Another word of caution, the water that first comes out of this, when it first starts coming out of this, is boiling hot. Yeah, because it's gotten all the heat from that, it's pretty hot. So until you figure out how fast it's going to come out, you usually start slow with it. And then keep an eye on some of these connections, like especially the hot side. This will tend to get soft when it gets warm, and sometimes they can slip off if the pressure is too high. And then spray something with hot water. So gentle stirring at this point will help. Because what will happen is around the coils of the cooler itself, it draws the heat from it, and then just there will be a layer around the coil that's cooler, and then you won't get as good of a heat transfer. So if you stir it, it disrupts that and puts hot beer or hot wort next to the coil. And when it cools a bit, you can sort of feel this one. Right now it's warm, but it's not really hot. But if I stir it, it'll go back to being hot. So when it gets cool a little bit, it's a gauge to sort of stir it. And then I'm going to go sanitize this so we can monitor the temperature, and then when it's down to 100, we'll be done. I'll be right back. This time of year, the water coming in off the street is pretty cold. We did a demonstration about a week and a half ago, and it was 55 degrees. It might even be colder than that now because it's been really cold lately. And it tends to chill this pretty quickly. In the summertime, it can be problematic because you're trying to cool it down to about 70 degrees or at least below 80. And if the water coming in off the street is 70 or 75 degrees, then it makes it much more challenging. Ideally, you want this process to take 45 minutes or less. Before we had talked about that precursor to DMS that forms, well, it forms at fairly warm temperatures, so, but it doesn't form at cool temperatures. So once the boiling stops, it starts accumulating again. So if you can cool it down to pitching temperature in about 45 minutes, then only a minimal amount will be produced. And then that's one less thing you have to worry about in your beer.
What's the pitching temperature?
Well, for ales, you want it to be around 70, about around the fermentation temperature. At least, in the summer, it's hard to get it down that low sometimes, so at least 80.
Below 80.
Yeah, below 80. If it's too much above, then it can suffer and die. If it's liquid yeast you're adding, the temperature of the yeast should be within 5 degrees of the temperature of what you're putting it into. If it's more than that, it'll suffer some shock and it'll lag, which means it will take longer to get started fermenting. If it's more than 10 degrees, you'll kill off some of it. If it's more than 20 degrees, you'll kill off almost all of it. And then nothing will happen. So try to get the temperatures close. I think the dries are more forgiving, although some packages will recommend rehydrating them. There's good reason to do so, but I find sometimes it can be more problematic rehydrating them than just sprinkling it in and letting it do its thing. I'm a big fan of sprinkling because it's less fuss. When you rehydrate them, they want you to do it at 104 degrees, which is a little hot, but it's dry at that point, and if you get it wrong and it's too hot, then it kills it, which is bad. If it's too cold, they say it doesn't get started properly and it lags, so I've killed more batches trying to rehydrate them than just sprinkling them in. So the last 10 years or more, I've only sprinkled them in. So sprinkling is good. Someone had told me they had read on the internet, someone had done a study like that, to sprinkle or not, or to sprinkle or hydrate. That was the question. And they tested it and they found out, despite the problems of doing it either way, by and large, the more successful batches were from just sprinkling it in. They had less problems. And they were much easier to do, too. No, we're almost there. It's about 105. Usually shoot for 100. We could probably stop it now because the topping up water is really cold. And that usually still gets it pretty close to...
You can use tap water.
Yes. Yeah, tap water is not bad.
St. Louis water's pretty good.
St. Louis water is very good. One of the easy ways to tell is, do you live in a town that's had a major brewery there for over 100 years?
Yeah.
It's because the water's good. That's the only reason they're here. All the major cities that have successful breweries, the water's good there. Yeah. Here it's the same. The water's moderately hard, which isn't bad, especially if you're doing pale ales or IPAs. Sometimes people even add a little bit more minerals to harden it further. If you're going to do pilsners with it, some of those, they work better with softer water. So you would dilute it a little with distilled water or just use spring water or reverse osmosis water. That's what I like. Because it's got little minerals in it, but mostly it's nice. It's very soft. It's really good for doing lagers. So normally I just try to filter it to get the chlorine out of it. Yeah.
You could do that for free.
Yep, that's what I have. At home I've got one of those pure filters. You could use a Brita filter. It's on the faucet, you turn it and then it starts, yeah, that works good. I just filter it through there, mainly to get the chlorine out of it. I mean, it takes out other stuff, so there's no lead in my beer. I don't know how much lead we have in our water anyway, but the chlorine's what I want out, because that can cause you some flavor issues. All right. All right, at this point it's cooled down to about 100 degrees. So with the topping up water, it'll be fine. Also at this point, when it's cool enough and 100 degrees is okay, you'll want to aerate it. And that's for the benefit of the yeast. Because in the beginning, when yeast first goes into this, it's not going to do fermentation. It's going to start in an aerobic phase and work with the oxygen and make more yeast. So if you have a lot of oxygen present, you'll get more yeast than when you started. And then once it rips all the oxygen out, which will only take a day or so, then it will go on to start making alcohol. So in the interest of aerating this as much as possible, I usually let this splash into the bucket carefully, because if this goes on the floor, your wife will kill you. Having a lot of foam is good at this point. This smells good. Then we want to top it up to 5 gallons, which is about here.
So that's your filtered water.
Not exactly. We don't have a filter on this one.
But how do you get the chlorine out of that? Or just,
Well, you know.
We don't. You can pre-boil the water. You can also treat it with Camden tablets to help remove the chlorine. If you're a winemaker, you have that at home already. One Camden tablet will dechlorinate something like 20 gallons of water.
but in this case, you're putting St. Louis County chlorinated water.
Yeah.
Got it.
This one isn't too, we've done it before, it's not too bad. At the moment I'm trying to get the foam away from the side enough to see if we have enough, if we have 5 gallons. But sometimes if your measuring is off, it's because it was so foamy you couldn't see if you had enough in it or not. And there we have it.